echoed like a lightning strike in the hushed courtroom. Every head turned, every whisper died, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Judge Morales froze mid-motion, his hands suspended over his gavel as he adjusted his glasses to make sure he heard right. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun, impossible, yet undeniable. Standing beside her was Maya Jameson, a single black mother trembling but holding back tears that threatened to spill. Her hands clutched a worn purse like a lifeline, knuckles white with the strain of keeping herself together. On the other side of the courtroom sat Derek Alcott, Lila's white father, wearing a designer suit that cost more than Maya made in 3 months. His smug expression screamed, "This will be easy," but something in his daughter's steady gaze made his confident smile waver. Everyone had expected a simple custody hearing, a deadbeat dad finally stepping up, a struggling single mother fighting to keep her child. Standard Tuesday morning fare for family court. No one expected what came next. They were about to witness something that would shake the very foundations of family law. If stories like this, where the truth speaks even through the smallest voices, matter to you, tap that like button now. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. 2 weeks earlier, Warehouse District. Derek's phone glowed in the dim light as he stood between 2 men whose faces belonged in federal wanted posters. The parking garage smelled of motor oil and something darker, the scent of transactions that happened in shadows. "The girl's 9, right?" Danny Webb's voice was gravelly, worn down by years of cigarettes and violence. "Perfect age, easy to transport, old enough to understand instructions." Derek nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he saw the credit receipt on his phone. "Custody hearings in 2 weeks. Judge always sides with the father when there's money involved." Tony Carrera leaned against his black SUV, counting bills with practiced efficiency. "And the mother?" "Won't be a problem," Derek said, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely certain. "She's broke, working double shifts just to survive. No lawyer, no resources, no fight left in her." The 3 men shook hands, a business deal sealed with the promise of an innocent child's future. None of them suspected that their merchandise was already watching, already learning, already preparing to fight back. Back in Family Courtroom 3. Judge Morales leaned forward, his weathered face creased with confusion and concern. In 30 years on the bench, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. "Miss Jameson, what exactly do you mean by representing your mother?" Lila's small hand instinctively went to the silver locket at her throat, her anchor, her source of strength when the world felt too big and too dangerous. She stood straighter, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of the entire courtroom. In her hands was a thick binder, organized with colored tabs and bulging with documents. She looked like a miniature attorney, if attorneys wore their best church dress and carried themselves with the desperate determination of someone fighting for their life. "Her lawyer quit this morning, Your Honor. My father paid him to—" The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed from the gallery, and Derek's attorney, Marcus Steinberg, shot to his feet like he'd been electrocuted. "Objection, Your Honor! This is highly irregular. A child cannot possibly—" But Lila didn't flinch, didn't cower, didn't show even a flicker of the fear that had kept her awake for countless nights. Instead, she opened her binder with practiced precision, revealing documents organized like a seasoned prosecutor's case file. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the pages, the only sign that beneath her composed exterior was a terrified little girl who just wanted to keep her family safe. "And I can prove it," she said, her voice cutting through Steinberg's protests like a blade through silk. "But first, Your Honor, I need to explain why my father really wants custody." Derek's confident facade cracked just slightly, a hairline fracture in his composure that only someone watching very carefully would notice. But Lila was watching. She'd been watching for months. What she was about to reveal would destroy more than just Derek's custody case. It would expose a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond this courtroom. 3 months earlier, Maya Jameson's alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 2 years. She rolled out of bed in their cramped one-bedroom apartment, her body aching from yesterday's double shift at Eddie's Diner. The coffee maker gurgled to life as she moved through their morning routine on autopilot. Shower, uniform, a quick check on Lila, who was still sleeping peacefully in the bed they shared. Their life wasn't much, but it was theirs. Maya worked herself to the bone to keep them afloat. Her hands permanently stained with coffee and grease, her feet swollen from 12-hour days on cheap linoleum. But Lila was fed, clothed, and loved. That had to be enough. It had been enough for 7 years, ever since Derek walked out when Lila was 2, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. 7 years of birthday cards that arrived late, if at all, of promises to visit that never materialized, of a man who treated fatherhood like a hobby he'd lost interest in. Then, on a Tuesday that started like any other, Derek showed up at their door. "Hey, Maya." His smile was different, practiced, calculated. Behind him stood a woman with a camera, snapping photos of their reunion for what he claimed was documentation. "I want to talk about Lila." He'd changed. Gone was the irresponsible boy who'd fled at the first sign of real commitment. In his place stood a man in expensive clothes, driving a car that cost more than Maya's annual salary. He talked about second chances and being the father Lila deserves, all while that camera captured every moment. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes scanning their sparse apartment with poorly concealed disdain. "Maybe it's time Lila had some stability in her life." But Lila, watching from the hallway with her small hand clutched around her silver locket, noticed things the adults missed. She saw how Derek's smile never reached his eyes, how he took pictures of their door locks and window latches, how he asked too many questions about Maya's work schedule and when they were usually home alone. Most unsettling of all was the way he looked at her, not with the warmth of a father reconnecting with his daughter, but with the calculating gaze of someone appraising valuable merchandise. That night, after Derek left with promises to stay in touch more, Lila lay awake listening to her mother cry softly in the next room. The silver locket felt warm against her chest, a reminder of her mother's love, but also a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each sob. She didn't know it yet, but Derek had already set his plan in motion, and she was about to become the target of something far more sinister than a custody battle. Now, unlike most 9-year-olds who might have been confused or hopeful about their father's sudden return, Lila didn't cry or dream about happy reunions. She investigated. Her education in the art of detection had begun innocently enough. Mrs. Barlow, the retired librarian who ran the after-school program at the branch library, had noticed Lila's quick mind and insatiable curiosity. What started as help with homework had evolved into informal lessons in research methodology. "Knowledge is power, little one," Mrs. Barlow would say, her wrinkled hands guiding Lila through database searches. "The most powerful weapon against those who would hurt us is information they don't think we can find." Using the library's computers, Lila began tracing Derek's financial records. At first, the numbers seemed innocent enough, a man who had clearly come into money. But what she discovered beneath the surface would chill her to the bone. Hidden behind shell companies were transactions that painted a picture of a man involved in activities far darker than simple deadbeat fatherhood. Large payments from untraceable sources, regular transfers to flagged accounts, and most disturbing of all, payments labeled with codes that made no sense until she cross-referenced them with missing persons databases. The breakthrough came when Derek carelessly left an old tablet at their apartment during one of his visits. While he charmed Maya in the living room, Lila quietly powered it on in the bedroom, her heart pounding as she realized what she might find. What she discovered in those cached files would haunt her nightmares for months to come. Screenshots of dark web conversations discussing merchandise and delivery schedules. Banking records showing payments from accounts flagged by anti-trafficking units. Encrypted messages that made her small hands shake as she realized their implications. Messages about children, about prices, about transportation arrangements that turned her blood to ice. And then she found the recording that would change everything. Derek's own voice captured automatically when he stood too close to the tablet during a phone call. Yeah, the contract's signed. The girl's worth more than you think. She's my ticket to starting big. Once I have custody, nobody asks questions when she's gone. It's quick money. Easy. The tablet slipped from her trembling fingers as the horrible truth crashed over her like a wave. She sat on the floor of their tiny bedroom, clutching her locket so tightly it left marks on her palm, and cried. Not the tears of a confused child, but the tears of someone who had just looked into the abyss and seen their own fate staring back. Derek wasn't trying to be her father. He was trying to sell her. 1 week before court, doubt hit Lila like a storm. She sat in the library surrounded by printouts and documents that painted a picture too horrible for most adults to comprehend. The weight of what she'd discovered pressed down on her like a physical force. Her small hand shook as she tried to organize the evidence into something coherent. But she was just a kid. Who would believe her? Who would listen to a 9-year-old accusing her father of trying to sell her into trafficking? Her silver locket felt heavier than ever as doubt crept in like poison. Maybe she should just stay quiet. Maybe if she didn't fight, if she just went along with whatever Derek wanted, he would change his mind. Maybe. Lila, dear? Mrs. Barlow's gentle voice broke through her spiral of fear. You look troubled? Lila looked up, and for a moment Mrs. Barlow saw past the composed exterior to the terrified child underneath. Tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. Mrs. Barlow, Lila whispered, her voice breaking, what if you know something really bad is going to happen, but you're too small for anyone to listen to you? Mrs. Barlow knelt beside Lila's chair, understanding that this was a moment that mattered more than any lesson she'd ever taught. You know what I've learned in my 78 years? The bravest people I've ever known weren't the biggest or the strongest. They were the ones who stood up and spoke the truth when it mattered most, even when they were scared. She lifted Lila's chin so their eyes met. You're braver than you think, little one. And sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. That night Lila came home to find her mother sitting at their tiny kitchen table, court papers spread before her, tears streaming down her face. Maya looked up as Lila entered, trying to hide her despair behind a weak smile. It's going to be okay, baby, Maya whispered, but her voice cracked with the lie. Maybe it would be good for you to live with your father. He can give you things I can't. No. Lila's voice was quiet, but firm. She sat beside her mother and took her hand, the silver locket catching the light from their cheap table lamp. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to trust me, no matter how crazy it sounds. What Lila told her mother that night would change both their lives forever. Back in Family Courtroom 3, Judge Morales held up a hand, silencing the attorney. Something in the child's demeanor, the careful preparation, the steady voice, the way she held herself like someone who'd seen too much, made him pause. Continue, Miss Jameson. Lila's fingers found her locket again as she placed a manila folder on the evidence table with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. The small gesture gave her strength, reminded her of her mother's love and Mrs. Barlow's words. The smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Your Honor, 3 months ago my father approached my mother's original attorney, David Martinez. This is a certified copy of a $50,000 wire transfer from my father's account to Mr. Martinez's personal account, dated the same day Mr. Martinez withdrew from our case. The courtroom gasped. Derek's face went pale, but he maintained his composure, though his hands now gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles. Your Honor, this is absurd, Derek said, standing up with practiced indignation. A child creating elaborate fantasies. The transfer is from Cayman National Bank, Lila continued, pulling out additional documents with methodical calm. The same bank where my father has been receiving payments for services I'll be describing shortly. Judge Morales examined the banking records, his expression growing more serious by the moment. The documentation was professional, thorough, and damning. But what Lila was about to play next would shatter Derek's carefully constructed facade completely. Your Honor, Lila said, reaching into her binder and pulling out a small digital recorder. Her hand trembled slightly. She was still just a 9-year-old girl, after all, but her voice remained strong. This recording was made in our living room 6 weeks ago. My father's old tablet automatically saves phone calls when it's connected to his Bluetooth headset. Derek's eyes widened as he realized what she held in her small hands. For the first time since entering the courtroom, genuine fear flickered across his face. Lila pressed play, her thumb steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. Derek's own voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. Yeah, the contract's signed. The girl's worth more than you think. She's my ticket to starting big. Once I have custody, nobody asks questions when she's gone. It's quick money. Easy. The silence that followed was deafening. If you believe truth like this should never be hidden, hit subscribe. We share powerful stories of courage and justice every week. Marcus Steinberg shot to his feet, his face flushed with panic. Your Honor, this is illegal surveillance. A minor cannot consent to record private conversations. But Lila was ready. She'd spent weeks researching legal precedents, and her preparation was about to pay off. No, sir, she said, her voice calm but fierce. Under Federal Code 18 U.S.C. 2511, a person has the right to record conversations in their own home when they reasonably believe a crime is being planned. This recording was made in my bedroom during a conversation about selling me into human trafficking. She pulled out another document, a legal brief she'd prepared with meticulous care. Furthermore, the recording was made by my father's own device, which he left in our home. Judge Morales examined the legal citations, clearly impressed despite himself. Miss Jameson, where did you learn about surveillance law? The public library, Your Honor. Mrs. Barlow taught me how to research legal databases. Derek's attorney tried again, sweat beading on his forehead. Even if the recording is admissible, it could be taken out of context. What Lila revealed next would prove that Derek's confession was just the beginning. She calmly placed banking records on the evidence table. $250,000 was wired to an offshore account controlled by my father 2 days after he filed for custody. This was the down payment. She paused, letting the magnitude sink in before delivering the blow that would destroy Derek's case completely. The remaining balance was to be paid upon my delivery. The courtroom erupted in horrified murmurs. Several reporters began typing frantically, realizing they were witnessing something far bigger than a custody dispute. They were watching the exposure of a human trafficking operation in real time. Your Honor, Lila continued, placing photographs on the evidence table, clear images of Derek meeting with 2 men in various locations around the city. These men are Danny Webb and Tony Carrera. Both have active federal warrants for human trafficking and child endangerment. Judge Morales studied the photographs, noting the clear images of faces, license plates, and timestamps. The documentation was thorough and absolutely damning. How did you obtain these photographs, Miss Jameson? I followed them, Your Honor. After school, on weekends when my father thought I was at the library. Lila's matter-of-fact tone made the confession even more chilling. Mrs. Barlow taught me about surveillance techniques for a school project on investigative journalism. What she revealed next would prove that Derek wasn't just a criminal. He was a serial predator. Your Honor, I discovered 3 previous cases where children disappeared after similar custody disputes. In each case, fathers with no prior relationship suddenly filed for custody, won, and the children vanished within weeks. Lila's voice grew softer, more emotional, as she spoke about the other children who hadn't been as prepared or as fortunate. Sarah Kurtz, age 8, disappeared from Phoenix. Tommy Green, age 7, vanished from Seattle. Rebecca Williams, age 10, went missing from Denver. She looked directly at Judge Morales, her young face carrying knowledge no child should possess. Your Honor, I'm not my father's first victim. I'm just the one who figured it out in time. Derek had been unraveling slowly throughout the hearing, but it was the mention of the other children that finally shattered his composure completely. He shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward as rage overtook calculated charm. The mask he'd worn for months finally slipped, revealing the monster underneath. "You little liar!" he screamed, pointing at Lila with such violence that several people in the gallery flinched. "You don't know what you're doing. You're just a stupid kid making up stories." Judge Morales slammed his gavel. "Mr. Alcott, one more outburst and you'll be removed in handcuffs." But Derek was beyond reason now, months of manipulation crumbling because a 9-year-old girl had been smarter than he'd given her credit for. "She thinks she's so smart, but she doesn't understand what she's cost me. Do you have any idea how much money?" He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd almost admitted, but it was too late. The words hung in the air like a confession written in blood. Lila looked up at him with steady, unflinching eyes that held no fear, only the quiet strength of someone who had faced the monster and refused to be intimidated. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Alcott. You're angry because I ruined your business transaction." Judge Morales took several long minutes to review all the evidence. When he finally looked up, his words would change everything. "In 30 years on this bench, I have never encountered a case quite like this one. The evidence presented today reveals a criminal conspiracy of the most heinous nature imaginable." He turned to Derek, who had slumped in his chair, all pretense finally abandoned. "Mr. Alcott, your petition for custody is not only denied, it has exposed what appears to be an ongoing human trafficking operation." Judge Morales nodded to the bailiff, who stepped forward with handcuffs. "Derek Alcott, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, fraud, attempted child endangerment, and bribery of an officer of the court." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Derek looked at his daughter one final time. His face was twisted with rage and something that might have been grudging respect for the child who had outsmarted him. "You think you've won? You're just a child. This isn't over." Lila stood up straighter, her small hand finding her mother's trembling fingers. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. "No, Mr. Alcott, I'm not just a child. I'm someone who refused to be your victim. And yes, this is over." The video of Lila's testimony spread across social media like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had 10 million views. By week's end, 40 million, with shares and comments pouring in worldwide. Legal experts called it unprecedented. Child advocacy groups hailed it as a watershed moment. But for Lila and Maya, the real victory was simpler. They were safe, together, and free. Maya received a full scholarship to nursing school, funded by the Lila Jamison Foundation, established by Move donors. For the first time in years, she didn't need double shifts to keep the lights on. Derek was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without parole. The investigation led to 17 other arrests, 9 children rescued from active exploitation, and the shutdown of a trafficking operation that had been running for over a decade. Danny Webb and Tony Carrere received life sentences. The 3 children whose cases Lila had researched, Sarah, Tommy, and Rebecca, were officially declared homicide victims, giving their families closure. 1 year later, Lila sat across from a national news anchor in the same library where her journey began. "People worldwide call you a hero. How does that feel?" Lila touched her silver locket, a new one, identical to the one Derek had destroyed, given to her by Mrs. Barlow. "I'm not a hero. I was just someone who refused to be a victim." She looked directly into the camera. "I'm proof that children have voices that matter. Knowledge is power. Documentation is evidence. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room tells the biggest truth." If Lila's courage inspired you, share this story and hit the notification bell. Someone out there might need this message today. Derek had been wrong about many things, but most of all about this. Lila Jamison was never just a child. She was justice with a 9-year-old's voice and a warrior's heart, and she had won.